Let me tell you about a patch of wild corn. Well, not corn yet, what will eventually become corn. Right now, it's a scraggly little grass called teosinte, growing in what is now southern Mexico, somewhere around 9,000 years ago. And I want you to picture this. There's a group of people camped nearby. They've been coming to this spot for years because this plant produces seeds that are edible. Not great, honestly. The cobs are tiny, the seeds are tough, but it's food, and they know where to find it. And that's what matters. Every year they show up, harvest what they can, eat some of it, carry some of it back to camp. Normal, routine. They're not thinking about agriculture. They don't even have a word for agriculture yet. They're just doing what they've always done. But here's what's happening without anyone noticing. Every time they harvest seeds and accidentally drop some near camp, or save some and spill a little, those seeds sprout the following spring, close to camp, and the plants that grow from the dropped seeds are the ones that made it through the journey. The ones with slightly bigger cobs, slightly more seeds, slightly easier to harvest. Year after year, without a single conscious decision, the plants near their camp are getting a little better, a little more productive, a little more worth coming back to. Nobody said, let's start farming. Nobody had a plan for it. The accident was already in motion. This is the Hot Compost. I'm Abby. Every episode we dig up something we were sold, figured out what it replaced, who profited, and what we do about it now. Let's get into it. Today we're talking about how that started to change. Not because of a revolution, not because anyone made a big decision, but because of a slow drift that nobody fully noticed until it had already changed everything. Okay, so the official name for what I'm about to describe is the agricultural revolution. I know. I said it wasn't a revolution. And that's because I have a problem with that word. Revolution implies something fast, a turning point, before and after. You can almost picture it. One day, everyone's a hunter-gatherer. The next, someone invents farming and everything changes. That is not what happened. The transition from hunting and gathering to farming took thousands of years. Some communities spent enormous stretches of time doing both, hunting and gathering most of their food while also tending patches of plants near camp, not committing to either. And here's the thing that makes this strange. For a long time, farming wasn't obviously the better choice. The people doing a little of both could see what full-time farmers were dealing with. The hard labor, the dependence on one place, the vulnerability when the crop failed, the fact that if a drought hit or a pest came through, you had nothing. Why would you give up a lifestyle that worked for one that was harder and riskier? The answer is that most people didn't choose to. It happened to them. Here's how researchers think it actually went. As populations grew over time, the land that could support foraging got more crops. The best territories had more competition. Moving on became harder, and the communities that had been casually tending those plant patches near camp suddenly found those patches becoming more important, more necessary, and more central to survival. The crop didn't trap them overnight. It trapped them over centuries. Each generation slightly more dependent on the planted food than the last. Each generation a little less mobile, until at some point, leaving wasn't really an option anymore. You had crops in the ground. You had food stored for winter. You had a structure you'd built and people depending on you to tend to it. The plant almost owned you. Here's a part of the agricultural revolution story that never made it into history classes. Farming made people worse off, at least at first, in a lot of ways for a long time. I know that sounds backwards. We're taught farming was a massive upgrade. More food, more stability, the foundation of everything that came after. And eventually, yes, it enabled cities and trade and all of that. But for the actual individual humans living through the transition, the evidence is rough. The clearest signal is height, actually. Archaeological remains show that populations across the Americas got shorter after transitioning to agriculture. People who foraged for a wide variety of foods, dozens of different plants, multiple animal species, seasonal rotation, were better nourished than the people who replaced them. Early farming communities ate mostly whatever their main crop was. Corn, and more corn. Same calories, way less variety, way less nutritional range. And actually, the teeth tell the same story. Archaeologists can look at ancient remains and tell you almost exactly when a community made the switch to farming, because that's when the cavities start. Hunter-gatherers had remarkably good teeth. Their varied diet and tougher foods kept their mouths healthier. soft, starchy, grain-heavy diets, decay everywhere. Disease went up too. When you're mobile, sickness doesn't spread the same way. When you pack people into a permanent settlement alongside their animals, things jump between species and tear through communities. Dense populations and domesticated animals together are basically a disease incubator. And the work hours for farming proved to be brutal. Early agricultural communities were working far more than the people who came before them. The 4 to 6 hour hunter-gatherer days were gone. So why did farming spread if it was making individuals worse off? Well, because it supported more people per square mile than foraging ever could. More people meant more labor. More labor meant more production. More production meant surplus. And surplus, we're going to come back to this over and over on the show, is where power comes from. It wasn't that farming was better for the people doing it. It's that farming communities eventually had more people, more resources, and more capacity to expand. They didn't win because they were healthier or happier. They won because there were more of them. Okay, I want to be honest with you because I think the story I just told is a little incomplete on its own, because farming also made things possible that genuinely changed everything. And I know that's 180 from what we previously talked about, but I mean it literally. Think about what surplus food actually unlocks. When you have more food than you need right then, when you can store it, save it, redistribute it, you free up people to do things other than find food. And when people get freed up, things happen. You get the first craftspeople, the first traders, the first people whose job is to remember and record things, which eventually becomes writing. The Cherokee, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississippian cultures, agricultural communities across what is now the United States, built sophisticated cities, trade networks, ceremonial centers, and political systems that spanned hundreds of miles. Cahokia, near what is now St. Louis, was at its peak larger than London at the same time in history. None of that happens without agriculture. Farming also meant that for the first time, community could survive a season without moving. If the hunt failed one year, the stored grain kept people alive. If a harsh winter came, the preserved food got the community through. That stability, knowing you could ride out a crisis, was genuinely new and genuinely valuable. And medicine, the deep plant knowledge that developed alongside agriculture, which plants healed which conditions, how to prepare them, how to grow them reliably, that accumulated over generations into real medical traditions. The Three Sisters system of planting corn, beans, and squash together. It was nutritional science. Those three crops together provide a more complete protein than any of them alone. Indigenous farmers figured that out through centuries of observation, long before anyone had a word for protein. So here's the complicated truth. Farming was genuinely worse for the individual people making the transition. Sicker, working harder, less free. That's real. And farming made things that genuinely mattered. The conditions for human culture to go deep instead of wide. That's also real. Both of those things are true at the same time. The question the show keeps asking isn't was farming good or bad? It's who benefited, who paid the cost, and whether the people making the decisions were the same ones living with the consequences. And spoiler alert, they usually weren't. We have this idea that history is basically a story of progress. Things get better. We figure stuff out. Each era improves on the one before it. The agricultural revolution is usually held up as one of the clearest examples of that. And in some ways, it genuinely is. But progress for a civilization and progress for the individual people inside it aren't always the same thing. Farming built civilizations while making the farmers themselves sicker and more dependent. And dependent here is the key word. The people who benefited most from the agricultural surplus, the traders, the administrators, the emerging ruling classes, were rarely the ones doing the farming. That gap between who creates the value and who captures it, that's not a new problem. It's one of the oldest problems there is, and it's one we're going to trace all the way from those first corn patches in Mexico to right now. Every time something gets sold as progress, as an upgrade, it's worth asking, toward what? For whom? And who's paying the cost? Those are the questions this show is built on. Next episode, we're talking about what was already growing here across what is now the United States before any of this arrived from outside. Because indigenous peoples across this continent were developing their own crops, their own food systems, right here for thousands of years. independently, and almost nobody knows about it. That's next week. I'm Abby. This is the Hot Compost. See you then.